All right, when you're getting ready to throw, you want to make sure you are positioned in the best way for throwing. I usually put a towel on my lap so I don't splash on myself. But I also want to point out that I've got my stool pushed all the way up to the wheel. I am sitting close up to the wheel. I've got the wheel turned on, my pedal over on the whichever side, right or left side, whichever one's more comfortable for you. And one thing before I get my hands messy and my wheel messy, we are using these Thomas Stewart wheels, and one of the neat things about them is that for cleanup, we can take the wheel head off, and we can lift up the splash pan. I'm not going to lift it all the way up because I've got water in there. But you can pick up the splash pan and you can clean it out that way. But when you're doing that, be aware that there's some grease inside here on there, and you don't really want to wipe that off and get that on the towel, get that on your other stuff. You also don't want to get it cleaned off of there because then it's going to rub on the wheel head when it's going. Put your wheel head back on and it's ready to go. So when you're starting to center the clay, you want to take your nice wedged piece of clay. I've got mine in a cone, a sphere or a cylinder is fine as well. What you don't want is a square or an octagon or some funny triangle, funny shape, because that's going to be harder to get centered. I'm going to put this onto the dry wheel head, and I'm not going to have any water on there. It's okay if there's some clay on there, but you don't want water on the wheel head. And I'm just going to set it down onto there. Some people throw it down. You want to get a little bit of pressure so that when you start the wheel spinning, it doesn't go flying. And then after that is secure onto there, then you can add some water and you can start to center. The whole process here of centering the clay is getting it ready to throw. And by ready to throw, I mean completely even. It looks fairly even right now, but you can tell it's got a little bit of twist in there. So we're going to use the principle here of the wheel spinning and our hands staying put to cause this clay to be even all the way around. And so the clay really has a choice. Is it going to stick to my hands or is it going to stick to the wheel head? That's where the water comes in. I'm going to get my hands nice and wet, and now they are sliding over that clay. As soon as my hands start to dry out, the clay is going to start to stick to my hands, and then centering is not going to work as well. So I'm going to start the wheel spinning fairly fast. I can take my foot off the pedal if I want to, because the pedal will stay, keep it moving. And that's just one less distraction to worry about when you're learning how to center. I'm going to use the palms of my hands, and the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of push down on the clay a little bit. That just makes sure that it's secured onto there, no water can get up underneath it. Now I've got a couple of options, and I'm going to show you several different ways to center. You don't have to use all of them. You try out the ones that are more comfortable for you. But first off, I'm going to show you coning up. I'm going to cone up this clay. I'm going to use this part of my hand, and I'm going to lean way over the clay so that my center of gravity, my shoulders, are above that clay. And I'm going to press the clay on either side. Not away from me, but on either side. I'm going to press my two hands together and slowly bring them up, closing my thumbs over the top of the clay. I don't want to whip my hands off like that, because in the worst case scenario, something like that happens. I need to keep myself steady, and the least amount of movement I can do is most likely to keep things steady. Now you see this is pretty well centered up here. It's still kind of bumpity down here, and that's fine. That's part of the process. I can come back to the bottom and work on that some more. But there's always going to be a little bit of clay there that's stuck to the wheel head. And that clay there, you don't really want to be dragging your hand hard along that bottom because it hurts. There's some grit in the clay that's going to scratch up your hand. So you can use one of your flat ribs to scrape away that clay. And lots of people keep a little bowl on the side where they can put that clay, or just make a kind of pile, or just let it go into the splash pan. Now I've got my clay much more even, and now I can start to bring this down. So the coning up process is relatively quick. I bring that clay up, make sure it's fairly even, clean off the wheel head, and now I'm going to get my hands wet again, and I'm going to push down. So this part of my hand is going to push the clay down, but I'm not just leaning back here and pushing down without any control. I'm going to lean my shoulders over this clay, get my center of gravity nice and close, and bring my side hand, my right hand in this case, together with my left hand so that they are working together as a team. Now, as I push down, the clay wants to come out and get a little bit wider. Naturally, that's the easiest place for it to go. as I push down, clay wants to go out, it runs into that side hand, which forces it to fill in down below. And here's what it looks like if I just use one hand by itself. See how I've got some wobble that came back into there. If I bring that side hand in, it becomes a little bit more even. Another thing I'm doing here is that side hand is not just floating out here on its own. It is attached to my leg, or put against my leg or my stomach, or my splash pan. Kind of depends on your body shape, what's most comfortable. But something to keep it braced. Now I'm going to continue pushing down and pushing in. As I push down, that right hand pushes in, and I eventually get to the point where I've got this piece fairly well centered here. It's flat across the top, it's more or less flat across the side. I can get a little bit of that extra clay off of there. Now you can see that it's pretty close to centered. If you get here on the first few days and want to go ahead and try it, that's fine. But we're aiming to get it a little bit more centered than it is currently right here. So I'm going to keep working here. I'm going to keep my hands in this same kind of position. One hand pushing down, one hand pushing in the side. Now, there I separated those two movements, but for realsies, you want to keep them together. You want to just, a viewer from the outside shouldn't really be able to see that you're doing something different here. They can't see much of the difference between pushing on the side and pushing on the top. You should be able to feel it, you as the thrower. Now, some people skip that coning process entirely, and they simply do this. And I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to bring this up pretty tall. And then, same hand position, but different pressure. Bring it down pretty low. And you can do just this back and forth. The important thing is, though, if you just go, oh yeah, I've moved the clay a little bit, just that much, you know, up and down just a tiny bit, it's not going to move enough clay. You really do need to bring it fairly low and fairly high. One other thing that I haven't really mentioned here, because I'm trying to keep things fairly simple, is that I said I was using this part of my hand, and what you should see in the video is that I've actually dropped over the back, you know, part of my finger, or back part of my hand, back part of my thumb. Something has dropped around and pushed on that corner, some part of either hand. If I completely push down and in, I'm going to eventually end up with a funny little bit that kind of comes out the side like that, and I don't want that. I want to keep things contained. So I'm pushing up, add some water if you start to stick, I'm pushing down. Pushing up, pushing down. How do you know when you're centered? Well, if you look down and you see a circle rather than a wiggly kind of shape, you're pretty well centered. My recommendation is when you start throwing, you're going to have some pieces that you center most of the way, and then you go ahead with the rest of the process. So we're going to do that. We're going to go ahead with the rest of the process here. So I'm going to keep basically that same hand position I had before. I've centered the clay, it's nice and even. I've got it really secure to the wheel head. I've still got my posture, I'm kind of bent over here. Now I'm going to drop a couple of fingers into the middle here, but rather than just coming at them like this, where they can go all uneven, I'm going to use my right hand and my body as a brace. So I've got my elbow against my leg or my stomach. I've got my top hand, my left hand in this case, on, sort of hanging on to my right hand, and they're both going to stay put. They can't move too much. I'm going to do just a little bit of a hole there, make sure it's round and centered. If your hole looks like a oval, you haven't done it quite right, and you can kind of come back in and recenter or re-drill that hole. Now that I've got a little cup there to hold water, I'll add some water so my fingers don't stick. And now I'm going to start to go straight down into this bowl shape that I'm going to be creating. Now you notice that when I created that hole, I've got a little bit of a ridge happening up here. And so right away I'm going to want to take care of that ridge. Now you never touch the clay while the wheel is stopped. You always want to, after you started centering, you always want to handle the clay while it's spinning. So while it's spinning, I'm going to bring my finger or my thumb down across that and push down that bit there. So that was drilling the hole. I've centered the clay, I've drilled the hole. Now I'm going to open out the floor, and we're going to start here. I'm going to do a bowl today, and so I'm going to pull my wall out and slowly bring my fingertips up. I don't want to angle my fingers. If I bend my fingers back like this, I'm going to create just a pointy bottom, and a lot of thickness down over here. That's not what I want to do. I want to bring that clay out, create that curved bottom for my bowl, and then I'll have more clay to work with in the wall. So my right hand stays braced against my body. My left fingers, as many as will fit in there right now, will pull out towards my palm. And then I've got a little bit of wobble here, or a little bit of bump here, and I'm going to compress that. Now, right away I can get in here with my sponge and get that water out of the inside. You do not want water sitting on the inside floor of your bowl or your cylinder or whatever it is you're making, because that water sitting there will absorb into that clay, stretch out that clay, and eventually cause cracks. So I've opened out that floor, fairly quick step. As soon as my right hand tried to move, I knew I was done. Now I'm going to pull up the wall. So I'm going to grab a couple of fingers down here. I could grab a knuckle and a finger, 2 fingers across from each other, hold a damp sponge right there with my fingers. But either way, I've got fingertips across from each other, a point across from on the inside and the outside across from the other hand. Dribble some water on my wall so that my fingers don't stick, and I'm going to lean over and squeeze these walls together. Now I've got a little bit of a bump going here. This must have been one that I didn't spend as much time wedging. I'm going to get my water out of here while I talk to you. So you can see this bump right here. That's an air pocket. Now the air pocket is generally a sign that you didn't wedge your clay enough, but it's not. If you can deal with it, you can keep that piece. So I'm going to just pop that air pocket with a needle tool. Pop a couple holes in that. Looks like I got another one here, and I got a little one down there. Sometimes when you're throwing, those air pockets just get pressed out. Ooh, I got all sorts of them. But you can also stop the wheel and pop them. So I'm going to compress my rim again here. I'm going to, this time the rim is not as strong, so I don't want to just come and press it like this. I want to have some support there. So my left hand holds onto that rim while my right hand compresses it. Now I'm going to come back to the bottom and I'm going to do what I did again. So I'm going to squeeze my fingertips together and bring them slowly up. Now, when you are starting to do this, it is really tempting to let your fingers walk around that way. One of the best ways to keep keep your fingers from doing that is to keep your elbows against your body. If your elbows are out here, out straight, it's really easy to get caught up in the movement of the wheel and follow that pot around. Keep your elbows against your body and you're going to stay a lot steadier. Now I have a fairly tall, bowl here. I'm going to get in the middle with a rib and smooth out my inside. I'm probably also going to cut a little bit my rim away because of the air bubble that I had earlier. So I'm going to use my metal rib to do the interior here. I'm going to hold my fingertips down low near the curve of this rib and my thumb behind it. You don't want to hold it back up like this because you don't have much control over it. I'm going to hold it nice and low, and you can practice on your palm. I'm going to let the clay, which is my palm right now, come into the rib and let the rib compress that rim. I don't want it straight up and down because that'll cut or bounce on the clay. I don't want it pointing backwards or over here on the left side of the wheel because I'll cut that clay. I need it to be at about 3 o'clock on the wheel head over on the right side of the center. So I'm going to press that in, compress my floor, and then I can also bring that rib out and it can help me shape some of that wall, get rid of some of that bump stuff left over from the holes or the air bubbles that I had. Now I'm not real happy with my rim. It's not quite even, and so I'm going to go ahead and use the needle tool to cut away some of this rib. So I'm going to hold my needle tool parallel to the wheel head, and not quite perpendicular to my clay. I want to have it come back at a little bit more gentle angle, an acute angle I think it is. And I'm going to have this underneath the lowest part of my rim. See how my hands stand steady and I'm bumping into my rim? That's kind of ripping up that clay. I need to take a good solid chunk of that clay off of my bowl here. So that needle tool comes slowly into the middle, then I stop my wheel, take off this chunk of clay. Now you notice I've got a little wiggle here. It's no big deal. I'm going to use my steady hands and maybe my sponge to help straighten that out. So just by keeping my hands steady, I can get that to pull back into even. Now it's kind of rough here. I can compress my rim like I did earlier, Or I can use a slightly different technique. I can fold my sponge over my thumb, and I'm not pushing down on the rim, I'm actually squeezing the corners. And I'm going to hold these two together so I'm a little bit more stable. And this is going to give me a nice, clean, and strong rib there. Now I've got some more water on the inside, got to get that out of there. And looks like I'm ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and undercut this. I'm going to show you how to undercut with the tools that come in your kit. I'm going to use the knife here, the wooden knife here, the point of the wooden knife, and I'm actually cutting into the clay. I'm not coming in from the bottom and pressing the clay. I'm using the blade of this knife to come into that clay. I'm picking an angle and following that angle all the way down to the wheel head. And then I'm going to try to cut some of this away. Oops, I've got a better way to do this. I'll show it on the next video. So I'm going to cut this clay off of the pot, and this is why I'm going to show you the other way to do it in the other video because I got a little messy here. So I'm going to cut that extra clay away off of the bottom. That just saves you some time later on. It makes it a whole lot easier to trim when you're ready to trim, and so I highly recommend you do that. Now I'm going to grab my wire tool. I put some water on the front of my wheel head here. I'm going to grab my wire tool and I'm going to pull back through there. Now this piece should be ready to get picked up. You want to have a board with piece of paper available to put it onto. The clay should be hydroplaning. You can lift it off and then put it onto your prepared board. The clay that I've got left on the wheel head here can be used right away as long as you dry it off. So get that extra water off of the surface, but you don't have to take the clay out of there. Give that clay a couple of little lines through it, and your next piece is ready to throw. You don't have to clean your wheel off all the way.